How can VR apps teach us about dementia?
And how should telcos compensate us after an outage? Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Alcatel.
Welcome to Vertical Hold, the tech show where we channel surf through the headlines in search of the big picture. I'm Alex Kidman, and I'm joined by a man who's vainly hoping this weekend to see his sports ball team win its first premiership in his lifetime, Adam Turner. Adam, what's new in tech?
We all occasionally sneak a look at Facebook during work hours, but the social media giant is aiming for a legitimate spot in your busy day with the upcoming launch of Facebook for Work. A bit like an in-house social network for sharing information, Facebook for Work sets out to compete with the likes of Slack, but is also expected to incorporate Facebook Messenger features with audio and video calling options so you can stay in touch with your co-workers.
Channel 9 has announced it's enabled Chromecast streaming for its 9Now streaming service, including live TV streaming. The move comes as Google is rumoured to be readying a new 4K-capable Chromecast for next week's big product launch event.
Business payments giant Square has made it easier for local small businesses to accept Apple, Android and Samsung Pay with the release of its palm-sized contactless card reader in Australia. As well as accepting contactless NFC payments from smartphones, the new Square reader also works with tap-and-go credit cards from Visa and MasterCard.
Sportsball schmortsball. In news that personally warms my heart, the ABC has confirmed it's fast-tracking the latest Doctor Who spin-off, Class, which will air on iView early on the 22nd of October, as soon as it's concluded its UK airing. Episodes will also air on ABC2 if you're more of the broadcast viewing type. So Adam, Square has added another reader to its array of payment solutions, this time a contactless one. Is this something that consumers should get really excited about, or primarily small businesses?
Well, consumers should get excited about it if they want to use things like Android Pay and Apple Pay in more places. Basically what Square does is they sell little readers that will connect to an Android or Apple device and turn it into a payment terminal, so it means they can accept credit card payments. The good thing for them is that the reader only costs about $50, and if you already have the phone, it's a very cheap way to get set up, and there are no other ongoing fees or anything like that. All you do is you pay a transaction fee, but no monthly fee, no annual fee, no sticking it to your fee. So if you're, a market vendor,
always important to have the sticking it to your fee.
Yeah, exactly. But we'll say you have a pop-up stall or you sell things at the market. If you've got one of the more expensive readers with a monthly fee and you don't use it this month, well, you've done your money. With Square, you can buy this thing, stick it in your pocket, use it twice a year, and it only costs you money when you're making a transaction. So for a small business, that could work out really well. But so it means that you're more likely now to be able to use your smartphone to pay in your local cafe or a pop-up stall at a festival or down at the market or something like that. So it is good news because it's making the technology more affordable for small businesses.
So this is a contactless reader, and of course there's been a bit of toing and froing about contactless payments and Apple locking down Apple Pay, especially in their NFC thing. Is that an issue for this particular reader and for Square's implementation?
Well, it depends how you're looking at it. If you're a business owner and you want to use this, it doesn't rely on tapping into the NFC. This little reader talks to your phone via Bluetooth. It's then when you, Alex, walk into my shop and want to buy something, you can have an Android Pay or an Apple Pay phone. You swipe it over my little card reader. My little card reader talks to my phone via Bluetooth and then goes to the internet. Of course, the problem is that the big banks in Australia are still fighting with Apple. So if you're with the ANZ, you're laughing. If you're with some of the smaller banks, you're okay. But the Commonwealth, Westpac and the NAB don't really want to get screwed over by Apple, and they saw what happened in the music industry. You can't really blame them. And they've gone to the ACCC and said, can we negotiate as a group deal? And it doesn't look like that's going to happen. So until they sort that out, there are going to be a large number of people say, well, my bank doesn't support Apple Pay. But in terms of a small business wanting to accept Apple Pay payments, all you really need is an Apple or Android smartphone and this $59 reader, and you're ready to go.
Yeah, but it's interesting. I've made a few payments with with businesses that have used the older Square reader in the past.
Yeah.
And they have typically been those much smaller businesses. And I guess there's almost a social aspect to it. There's certain businesses where I think, you're a storefront, you've actually got a physical location. I think you probably should take a card. And then, as you said, there's little pop-up shops and stalls and market stalls and so on, where I honestly wouldn't always think, I'll pay for this with a card. I'd probably think, no, if I'm going there, I've got to have some cash in my pocket. But I guess that's slowly evolving, isn't it?
Well, personally, I don't think there's any shame in being a small business that only takes cash and doesn't take cards, as long as it's not costing you business. One of my favourite pizza shops, cash only, they don't take cards. I know that. Their regular customers know that. We work around it. It's not a big deal. If they decided to start taking cards, well, then people would pay by card, and now it's costing the pizza shop money because they're losing a slice of that transaction. So why should they start accepting cards just because some people are too lazy to carry around cash? But it kind of just depends where you are. I suppose the flip side
argument there is that if I'm from out of town and I rock up to the pizza joint thinking, right, it's a physical store and I can pay with a card, and I discover I can't, I'm going next door to the pizza joint that does. It's always a bit of a balancing act.
This is a suburban pizza shop that's not getting people from out of town. That's the difference. It really depends on who your customers are. If you were set up in the touristy area and you didn't accept credit cards, then you're really shooting yourself in the foot. But if you're just you're a cafe, your pizza shop, you're dealing with your local customers who know that, I don't think it's so much of a big deal, and you shouldn't feel forced to take cards if you don't want to. But yeah, anyone who's catering to tourists, you want to be able to accept cards.
So Adam, Vodafone joined that not so exclusive club of telcos in 2016 who've had an outage.
Yeah.
This isn't good news for anyone, is it?
Well, no, not really, but there was a time when if your service provider, particularly your telco, had an outage, well, stiff, suck it. What are you going to do about it? But now that people like to squeal about it on social media and they want to be seen to be doing something about that, when they have an outage, they feel like they have to respond, and they usually want to offer you something in return. Vodafone had an outage on Sunday night, and it was anywhere between, sort of 5 and 8 hours, depending on who you ask. And looks like the main problem was is that they were pushing all their customers off 4G onto 3G because there was a problem with the 4G. And so what happened is some people, the congestion got so bad that they couldn't get through. So it was not so much an outage as in just difficult to get through, which, of course, if you're the person who can't get through, it feels like the bloody same thing. They've
blamed this on a faulty router, and as you said, on shifting people from 4G. Their 4G network was down. They've refarmed a lot of their existing 3G stuff over to 4G in order to build 4G up. Yeah. But of course, that then creates the problem that when they need to shift people, they don't have the capacity.
4G is designed to take the heavy load these days, so that's a problem when that goes down. But probably the interesting thing here, whether or not you're a Vodafone customer, is what they're doing about it. Now, with Telstra, when they've had their outages, they've had, hey, free data day, and they pick a Sunday and you can just download as much as you bloody can. Vodafone's doing it differently. What they're saying is all the customers who were, everyone who was affected, and it's prepaid and postpaid, you get an extra 2 gig of data in the next month. And so you can then use that data whenever you want. And some people would think that's better because if you're a business customer and you were impacted by the Telstra outage and they've said, hey, free data on a Sunday, it's like, well, that's not actually much use to me. Why don't you give me free data on a weekday like the day that you actually had the outage? But giving you the 2 gig and saying, here, use it when you want, might be more useful to some people. What do you reckon?
Yeah, look, I think that there's definitely something in that. I've got to say, I'm a Telstra customer. They've had 2 free data days. And I don't think I used any of their free data. Like, it was a Sunday and I was largely around my
I'm the same.
Wi-Fi. So I just didn't really bother. Whereas if you said to me, right, well, you've got 2 gig more to use over the month, that probably is a little bit more useful. At the same time, though, the thing that you've kind of got to realise is that this is largely a public relations exercise. They're not actually obliged to do all that much. I went and had a look at the way the contracts are structured for the telcos, and they've all got exclusionary clauses that effectively say, and it's not an entirely unfair thing to say.
Yeah.
Not in those precise words, but almost. They basically say, look, mobile networks can go up, they can go down. We do not guarantee universal service in any way, shape or form. A couple of them may have some language around compensation. So, for example, Telstra has this interesting thing where if your service is out for a reasonable length of time, and they don't fix it, they will technically, this is in their standard form of agreement, they'll technically pay you $40. But the problem is, the way they've worded it, they've got to have a chance to respond, a chance to fix. You've got to then complain. Basically, nobody's going to bother.
Yeah.
And honestly, by the time they fix it, a day is not going to count. Basically, even if they were out for a full 24 hours, it's not going to count.
And you've got to find the paperwork, and it's downstairs in the dark behind a door with "Beware of the Leopard" written on it.
Exactly. And look, I mean, the other practical reality of all of this is that the actual relatable cost of going down, of the network going down in terms of straight consumer law would mean that any refund you might think you were entitled to is probably frighteningly small.
It's a fraction.
I crunched the numbers for a Vodafone plan. So if you're on a Vodafone $100 plan, which is an awful lot of plans with phones, for example, $100 plan for the month, then your 5 hours of access, just in terms of the accessibility, and of course you can't divide the calls or the texts because they're both infinite anyway, and you didn't have access to the data, so that didn't get burnt away. So it's basically just the access time you might be able to get a case up for claiming. The total cost of a 5-hour outage, if it was 5 hours for you, is about 70 cents.
Ooh,
by the time you've actually,
yeah.
Exactly. By the time you've grunted and groaned and made all the complaints, you will have wasted more than 70 cents doing it.
Yeah.
So 2 gig is, in that sense, it's a bit more of an additional bonus. At the same time, I think people have, got a reasonable expectation in this day and age that their mobile network should be as robust as possible, especially given so many people now only have a mobile. They don't have a landline. It is their mode of communication.
In some ways, I think from Vodafone, the 2 gig offer is smart as well, because when Telstra had the outage and then said, right, we're going to give everyone free data on Sunday, they really put themselves on the line, because there was a risk that the whole network was going to fall over again when everyone hammered it. That's not going to happen to Vodafone, because that 2 gigs around to spend whenever you want. There's not one point in time where everyone's going to say, right, I want my 2 gig right now. So it's much smarter in terms of protecting your network to do it that way, rather than say, this Sunday, do your best.
I guess the flip side of that, though, is that Telstra got a couple of free network stress testing days out of it.
But how bad would it have looked if it had fallen over?
There was that guy who very publicly said that he pirated hundreds and hundreds of gigabytes of things over the course of a Sunday. And I mean, I don't know if I'd be quite that willing to say, hey, I'm over here copyright infringing. But that being said, Telstra could then turn around and say, look, our network can handle this.
Piracy. We are the provider of choice if you want to download every episode of Game of Thrones ever. Yeah. Not sure if that's quite what they were going for. So, Alex, September's Dementia Awareness Month, and they're doing something interesting with VR. What's going on there?
Yeah, now you might think that, dementia and technology don't have a huge correlation, but that doesn't have to be so. Alzheimer's Australia Victoria has developed a new VR app designed to educate Australians about the reality of living with Alzheimer's, and earlier in the week I caught up with Dr. Tanya Petrovic to discuss the new application.
So chatting to Dr. Tanya Petrovic from Alzheimer's Australia Victoria about Edie, a new VR app designed to raise awareness and educate around Alzheimer's issues. So why VR?
Well, in Melbourne, we've got a facility called the Dementia Learning Centre, and we've used that room as an immersive sensory environment where we give people an experience of what it might be like to have dementia. And the room actually has a massive screen that's 10 metres long, and we have the virtual dementia experience screened on there. And we've found that people respond extremely well to that experience. The only issue is that it's in Parkville in Melbourne, and so not very mobile. And therefore we felt that we wanted to try a mobile immersive experience, and so that's why we're going with Google Cardboard to see how people take to that platform, and I think it's going to work just as well. In fact, in some respects, with the goggles on your head, you're more immersed, if you like, than when you're in a room.
Because I suppose there is nothing else around you. It's certainly an interesting avenue for VR to take. Is the goal with this as much to do with educating as with raising awareness of the issues of Alzheimer's for Australians?
Yes, that's quite right. So you can get it out to a much larger audience, obviously. So we can, through the Google platform, which is quite affordable, you can get it to a much larger array of people. And really, it's about getting people to have a little glimpse of what the world is like for a person living with dementia, and then getting them to ask questions and finding out more. So yes, absolutely about awareness raising. But then in our classrooms or in our workshops, we can take the experience and we can elaborate on that by doing a lot of reflection and understanding of how our practice can support people living with dementia.
So for somebody who downloads the ED app and has a look at it and then has further questions, has further concerns, what would be the most sensible route for them to take for that?
Okay, so we ask people to get onto our website, fightdementia.org.au/EDIE, and on that page they can find out if they're a family member. They can be directed towards our online services or a phone, if there is a phone that they can call, or if they are a professional, there are workshops and online resources for them.
All right, so that sounds really interesting. Who's the target audience for this?
The target audience, technically, as I understand it, is pretty much everyone, or everyone capable of viewing the application, and all you really need is a Google Cardboard viewer. For what it's worth, Alzheimer's Australia Victoria are selling those if you don't have one, but you can build one yourself. There's plenty of plans for those around. And the idea is that they can use it as an education app for people who need training in dealing with the challenges of living with someone with a diagnosis of Alzheimer's, or with a dementia-style diagnosis, I should say. But equally just for people to recognise that this particularly terrible disease affects people, how it affects people, and what the experience of doing that is like. So it educates, it builds a certain level of sympathy and understanding as well, because it is one of those issues that can be so easily misunderstood, and where people can feel as though they're criticised for having a disease they never wanted in the first place.
But I guess, as you say, it's also difficult for other people. Like if I've got a broken arm or a broken leg, you can see that, you know what that is, you can relate to that. Even if you haven't actually had a broken arm yourself, you can get your head around what's going on. But something like this, it can be difficult, I guess, for other people to really grasp the full meaning of what's going on. And having spent a bit of time in VR and knowing how immersive it can be, I imagine it's a really good tool for trying to share your experiences with someone else.
Yeah, and I mean, they've actually done a lot of really interesting work in technology. A couple of years ago, I wrote about a forest application that they were developing at the time, and this was not for people to understand the effects of Alzheimer's. This was actually for people dealing with Alzheimer's themselves as a calming, meditative kind of environment. So they're kind of pushing what can be done further and further with this, and it's one of those things I think that can only get better. But it's also, I find it really encouraging because an awful lot of VR is terribly entertainment-centric, and there's nothing particularly wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with having, a really good immersive VR game. Last week I had a chance to have a quick look at the new Resident Evil game in VR, and whilst it left my head a bit wobbly, the actual effect of the game was great. It worked well for that kind of thing. But it's nice to see this kind of technology being put to a much more serious purpose, and to a serious purpose which has got a genuine social good at the end of it. Well, that just about wraps up another episode of Vertical Hold. Remember, if you've got any comments, hit us up in the comments section on YouTube, via Twitter, or the Facebook Vertical Hold page.
Thanks for listening, and remember, if you like what you hear, hit that subscribe button. Kana Bulldogs! Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Alcatel.